Greetings to my dear guests on this video. I wish you a pleasant viewing and look forward to your feedback in the comments. They say if you love what you do, you'll never work a day in your life. I used to believe that. I really did. For 5 years, I poured my heart into my job as head of the client engagement department at Westbridge Financial. I wasn't just managing people, I was building something. My team was a mix of sharp, driven individuals who actually gave a damn. We weren't perfect, but we were solid. And I loved them like family. I created our workflows, coached the new hires, even fixed the messes that other departments didn't want to touch. I made us visible, respected, essential. Monday mornings didn't scare me. I walked into that glass-walled office with my head high, ready to dig in. My reports were crisp, my numbers always on point. I was the go-to for anything client-facing, and if something went wrong, it came across my desk. But I didn't mind. I thrived in the chaos. I made sense of it. And somewhere in that rhythm, I carved out a small kingdom where I mattered. And then, the whispers began. It started subtle. A raised eyebrow here, a sudden hush when I walked into the break room. I brushed it off at first. Office gossip is as common as bad coffee. But it grew louder. Did you hear who's been staying late with Mr. Callahan? She's not even on payroll, but she's always in his office. Rose built that team, and now look who's getting all the private invites. The woman they were talking about? Tessa. Fresh-faced, always overdressed for the job she technically didn't have. She was introduced as a consultant, helping us refine our digital strategy, but no one ever saw her consult anything. Except maybe the mirror on her way into our director's office. At first, I gave her the benefit of the doubt. God knows I've had to prove myself in rooms where people thought I didn't belong. But Tessa never once tried to understand the department she supposedly supported. She smiled too wide, asked no questions, and somehow always got what she needed without lifting a finger. It didn't make sense. Until it did. I'll never forget the day I caught them in the hallway. My boss, Mr. Callahan, and Tessa, talking in whispers like teenagers caught where they shouldn't be. He had that crooked little grin he usually reserved for big clients. She tucked her hair behind her ear in that performative, calculated way. It wasn't professional. It wasn't even subtle. And yet, I kept doing my job. I kept showing up. I kept holding the department together because I wasn't going to let rumors shake me. I'd earned my place, every inch of it. But then he said it. The words that still make my stomach twist. I'm not going to make every woman in this office a department head, Rose. That's when I knew. This wasn't about work. It never had been. At first, I tried to be civil. I told myself Tessa was just adjusting, finding her footing. Maybe she'd never worked in a fast-paced office like ours before. Maybe she didn't know the stakes. I even made an effort, invited her to a department sync, looped her into emails, gave her a heads up before client presentations. But she made it clear she wasn't interested. Her tone changed. That fake politeness she wore like lipstick suddenly disappeared. She'd interrupt me mid-sentence in meetings, laugh a little too loudly at jokes she made about our department being stuck in old workflows. One morning, she sauntered in 25 minutes late to a strategy session I'd been preparing all week, iced coffee in hand, no apology, no explanation. She plopped down next to Mr. Callahan and whispered something in his ear. He smirked. Then he looked at me and said, "Rose, let's not waste time on legacy systems. Tessa's got a fresh angle." She didn't even open her laptop. By week 3, her tardiness was a routine. 10 minutes late, 15, sometimes more. When I tried to address it, gently, respectfully, she cut me off. "I'm not your employee, Rose. You don't get to manage me." She said it with that infuriating little smile, the kind that dares you to react so she can play the victim. I bit my tongue so hard I tasted blood. What made it worse? The team noticed. I could feel them watching me, waiting to see if I'd say something, do something, and I wanted to. God, I wanted to. But every time I brought it up with Mr. Callahan, he brushed it off like lint on his tailored jacket. "She's not part of your team," he said once, leaning back in his chair like a king. "Let her do her thing. She's got potential. You should try to be more collaborative, Rose." Collaborative. As if I hadn't spent 5 years lifting that department from the ground up, mentoring new hires, smoothing over client crises, and pulling 12-hour days to fix problems no one else could touch. as if I hadn't already offered more grace than she deserved. And yet, Tessa kept climbing. More access, more visibility, more invitations to meetings she had no business attending. She didn't know our systems. She couldn't answer a single technical question without deferring to someone else. But Mr. Callahan didn't seem to care. Worse, he seemed impressed by her. Like the less she did, the more he wanted her around. It was getting harder to hide my frustration. My team had questions I couldn't answer. Why was Tessa sitting in on our budget review? Why was she signing off on client materials? Why was she speaking on behalf of the department she barely understood? I didn't have answers. I only had instincts. And my instincts were screaming. Something was coming. I could feel it. We were 3 weeks from launch. The client project, Ellison Phase III, was the biggest initiative of the year. A 9-month marathon, full of late nights, changing specs, internal politics, and the kind of technical complexity that could make or break a department. And mine had led it. We'd pulled it off. Barely. My team had weathered staff shortages, scope creep, and endless change requests without missing a milestone. The client was thrilled, the metrics were strong, and we were in the final prep stage for rollout. But something felt off. Mr. Callahan, who had barely involved himself during the heavy lifting, suddenly started attending every status meeting. And not as a passive observer. He came with questions, and not the kind you ask when you want clarity. They were landmines, disguised as curiosity, laced with implication. Why are we using the 3.4 pathway for implementation instead of the 3.5? Do we have a contingency in place if the compliance module fails? No? That's a big gap. Have we validated that Tessa's optimization suggestions were included? Tessa didn't have optimization suggestions. She had notes she scribbled during meetings, half-baked thoughts she picked up from overhearing things she didn't understand. But suddenly, her ideas were gospel, and we were being judged for not implementing them, despite the fact that they made no functional sense. I started to push back, gently, professionally. I came prepared to meetings with slide decks, data, even client feedback that supported our approach. But it didn't matter, because Mr. Callahan didn't care about the project anymore. He cared about disrupting the system that had made this department run like clockwork. He was testing the threads, looking for weak seams, and when he couldn't find any, he started cutting on purpose. One Friday morning, just after we finished a flawless internal review, he pulled me aside in the hallway. No warning, no smile. "Rose, I think it's time we introduce a little knife into the process," he said. I blinked. A what? He leaned against the wall, hands in his pockets, eyes gleaming like he was enjoying some inside joke. "A knife, stir the pot a bit, create some discomfort. It's the only way a department really grows." I stared at him. Why would we disrupt a process that's working? He shrugged. Because growth comes from pressure. And to be blunt, your team's gotten too comfortable. Tessa brings a new energy. I want her to challenge the way you think. My pulse throbbed in my ears. She's undermining protocol. She's bypassing structure. She doesn't even understand the core systems. He smiled. And yet, she's shaking things up. That's leadership. No, that wasn't leadership. That was chaos. That was manipulation. That was sabotage dressed up as strategy. "You think this is how teams develop?" I asked quietly, trying not to let my voice break. "By cutting into them while they're still healing from the last fire?" He tilted his head. "I think it's how they evolve. Besides," and here it came, the dagger in the smile, "you've always kept things too tightly controlled, Rose. Maybe it's time to let someone else stretch the boundaries." Someone else. He wasn't just introducing chaos, he was setting the stage, and I was beginning to see where this script was going. That night, I sat at my desk long after the office went dark. I reread every deliverable, every report, not because I didn't trust my team, but because I needed to remind myself that we were good. We were better than good. We were careful, thorough, accountable. But it wouldn't matter. Not if the narrative was already being rewritten behind closed doors. And the worst part? I could feel the knife coming. It started with a single typo, then a misfiled budget sheet, then a report submitted 3 hours late, missing 2 attachments with the client's name spelled wrong. "Tessa must have hit the wrong version," Mr. Callahan said when I brought it up. "She's still learning the ropes." Learning the ropes? She had been shadowing me, shadowing us, for nearly 2 months now. But instead of learning, she coasted. She showed up late, skipped prep meetings, and handed off real work to anyone too polite to say no. She never took notes. She never asked questions. She just smiled and floated around like a guest star in someone else's movie. And I was the one cleaning up after her. Every single time. I stayed late to fix the reports she botched. I double-checked the data in her forecasts. I reworded summaries she submitted riddled with vague buzzwords and no actual analysis. It wasn't just sloppy. It was dangerous. We were weeks from launching one of the most sensitive client programs we'd ever delivered, and she was out here treating it like a group project in high school, where someone else would always step in to pull up the grade. And guess who that someone always was? I tried. God, I tried to keep my composure. I didn't want to snap in front of the team. I didn't want to become that manager, the one who couldn't hide her frustration. But I was tired. Not the kind of tired that sleep fixes. The kind that lives deep in your bones, where exhaustion rubs against anger like flint. And still, I corrected. I adjusted. I protected her from looking foolish in front of clients, because if she looked foolish, it made the department look foolish. And I wasn't about to let everything we'd built get dragged down because the boss's pet couldn't remember what KPI stood for. The final straw came on a Tuesday. We had a critical review meeting with the Ellison execs. Tessa was supposed to present the updated stakeholder impact metrics, a basic task, something even a junior analyst could have managed. She showed up 20 minutes late, lip gloss fresh, slides disorganized. And when she started talking, my blood turned to ice. She quoted the wrong quarter, mixed up 2 departments, and used data from a previous version of the report, the one before we had fixed the allocation errors. The Ellison lead raised an eyebrow. "Sorry, can we clarify that last point?" I jumped in. "Absolutely. I think what Tessa meant was that those figures were from Q2. For Q3, we've implemented a reallocation to reflect the revised client engagement tiers." I salvaged it, somehow. Again. But afterward, I sat in my office staring at the wall for a long time, the kind of stillness that only comes when you realize something deep and unfixable has shifted. I couldn't do this anymore. Not like this. The pressure wasn't just coming from above. It was bleeding in from the sides, from underneath, from every direction. My job was no longer about leading a department. It was about babysitting a disaster in progress while pretending nothing was wrong. And the worst part? Tessa didn't even notice. Or maybe she did, and just didn't care. She breezed past my desk later that afternoon, latte in hand, humming to herself. "Great job today," she chirped. "I think they really liked our presentation." Our presentation. I smiled, tightly, politely, but something inside me splintered. I was reaching my breaking point, and I knew, if this continued, either something was going to snap, or I was. I knew something was off the moment I walked into the office that morning. The usual rhythm was missing. My team, normally buzzing with energy before the weekly strategy meeting, sat unusually quiet. Eyes darted up and then quickly away as I passed. Whispers fell silent. There was a tension in the air, sharp and metallic, like the moment before a storm hits. I checked my calendar. 9 a.m., Conference Room B, our regular leadership sync. Only this time, the invite wasn't from me. It was from Mr. Callahan. I should have known. Still, I went in, head high, laptop under my arm. Tessa was already there, perched at the end of the table like she'd been born in that chair, her blazer crisp, lips painted like a news anchor. Mr. Callahan walked in 10 minutes late, sipping his espresso like nothing in the world could touch him. "Let's make this quick," he said, placing his mug on the table with a deliberate clink. "There are going to be some changes." That's when he did it. No preamble, no warning, no acknowledgement of the years I'd poured into that room. "I've decided to restructure leadership," he announced. "Effective immediately, Tessa will be stepping in as interim department head. Rose," he turned to me, voice neutral, face unreadable, "you'll be transitioning into a support role, providing administrative continuity during the adjustment." I couldn't speak. My throat closed so tight I could barely breathe. A support role? He meant secretary. I stared at him. At Tessa. At the faces around the table who didn't dare look at me. My voice finally came out, tight and low. Why? He gave me a look like I was being childish. Because I'm not going to be the department head for everyone, Rose. It's not sustainable. Tessa brings fresh eyes. This is how companies evolve. Evolve. They were calling it evolution when it was nothing more than betrayal. I felt every eye in the room watching me, waiting to see if I'd cry, scream, beg. But I didn't. I just nodded, slowly, almost mechanically. Tessa smiled at me, not with kindness, but with victory, as if she'd just won something she never earned. I walked out of that room and straight into the restroom, locked the stall door, and sat on the toilet lid trying to breathe. My hands were shaking. My chest felt tight. I wasn't just humiliated. I was gutted. Everything I had built was gone. Just like that. And in its place, they handed me a title that stripped me of everything but my name. I didn't cry. I thought I would. I thought I'd crumble in that bathroom stall, or in my car in the parking garage, or maybe later, curled up in bed with a bottle of wine and the lights off. But I didn't, because somewhere between humiliation and heartbreak, something else bloomed inside me. Clarity. Tessa wasn't ready. She wasn't even close. She didn't understand the structure of the Ellison rollout. She couldn't interpret the back-end reports. She didn't know how to navigate the personalities of our key stakeholders, or how to preemptively manage the issues that would inevitably arise. She had no real grasp of our systems, and now, she had no one left to catch her. Because I was done. I wasn't going to fix her messes anymore. I wasn't going to stay late rewriting her reports, or quietly correct her blunders during client meetings. I wasn't going to pretend things were running smoothly while she stumbled through leadership like it was some kind of game. Let her sink. Let them both feel the weight of what they'd done. At first, it was small. She sent a project timeline to the Ellison team that hadn't been updated with the latest specs. They didn't respond. They didn't need to. I'd worked with them long enough to know what that silence meant. They were confused, unimpressed. Then came the budget sheet, off by 20 grand. A decimal error, probably. Rookie mistake. But one that would trigger a delay in procurement and throw the entire vendor schedule off by a week. I watched from my new desk outside Mr. Callahan's office. Smaller, windowless, positioned just perfectly so I could hear his phone calls but not be included in them, as it all began to unravel. Tessa floundered. She didn't even realize the mistakes until someone pointed them out. And when they did, she panicked. Tried to assign blame. Dodged accountability. Once, I heard her snap at one of the junior analysts. Rose used to handle that. How was I supposed to know? But I didn't say a word, because it wasn't my job anymore. And for the first time, I wasn't going to make it my problem. The pressure started to mount quickly. Emails from the client grew colder, shorter. Internal memos became tense, passive-aggressive. My old team began to avoid eye contact, as if they were afraid of what they might see in my face. Pity? Smugness? I gave them neither. I just kept working. Quietly, precisely, professionally. But I watched it all. And I waited. Because I knew it was coming. Mr. Callahan thought he could gut a department, prop up a mistress, and expect miracles. He thought he could humiliate the one person who knew how to keep everything running, and that it would somehow still run. But I had held it all together for years. And now that my hands were off the wheel, he was about to find out what happens when the person behind the curtain finally steps away. I'll give her this. Tessa was bold. After weeks of skating on charm and curated incompetence, she decided she was ready. No more late-night corrections from me. No quiet cleanup by the analyst she dismissed as too slow. No asking for help, not even from Mr. Callahan. She wanted to prove herself, and she picked the worst possible moment to do it. It was a Thursday afternoon. The quarterly performance report was due, the one that went straight to the executive board and our biggest client, Ellison. It included projections, cost-to-value ratios, and a breakdown of the final deliverables for Phase 3. This report had to be flawless. And for once, Mr. Callahan wasn't hovering. He'd been pulled into a last-minute off-site meeting and didn't have time to review her draft like usual, which really meant quietly rewriting it behind the scenes before she hit send. So Tessa had no safety net. I watched her from my desk, how she sat unusually straight in her chair, jaw tight, fingers flying over her keyboard with frantic confidence. She didn't speak to anyone, didn't ask for a second opinion. Just finished typing, attached the file, and clicked send with a triumphant little smirk. She even said, loud enough for a few of us to hear, "Guess I don't need babysitting after all." And for a split second, I almost believed she might pull it off. That somehow, by sheer luck or divine mercy, the report would be fine. But then the emails started rolling in. First from legal, "Please clarify the data source cited on page 3. There seems to be a discrepancy." Then from the finance lead, "Budget summary doesn't match the allocation sheets. Urgent." And finally, from the Ellison liaison herself, "Some figures appear to be recycled from Q2. Are we missing the updated performance metrics for Q4? By noon, the damage was visible. She had submitted the wrong version. Again. But this time, it wasn't a harmless internal doc. It was a formal deliverable with numbers that would be cited in investor meetings. She had copied sections from old reports, mismatched client names, and even used outdated performance graphs. And no one had caught it, because no one was allowed to. That afternoon, Mr. Callahan stormed back into the office. Red-faced. Quiet in that terrifying way. The way people get when they know they can't blame the obvious target because they put her there in the first place. I was still at my desk when he slammed his door shut behind them. Him and Tessa. The walls weren't thick. I could hear enough. "You told me you had it under control." "I did have it. Why didn't you look it over like you always do?" "I wasn't here, Tessa. You should have asked someone. Anyone." "Who? Rose? You made her a secretary." Silence. Sharp, choking silence. When the door finally opened, she walked out first. No smirk this time. Eyes glossy, face pale, lips pressed tight like she was holding back something dangerous. She didn't say a word, just grabbed her purse and left. And I sat there, calm, quiet, watching the edges of their little illusions start to curl like burnt paper. The collapse had begun. Forgiveness always came easy for Tessa. A missed meeting? She's juggling a lot right now. A bungled email chain with the client CC'd on internal complaints? She didn't mean to. Let's move on. A spreadsheet full of misaligned data points that caused a procurement delay? We all make mistakes. Give her a chance. Mr. Callahan forgave her like it was his job, and every time, the message was the same. Her charm outweighed her flaws. Her mistakes weren't really mistakes. They were learning opportunities. Opportunities that somehow I never got. Not once. Not in 5 years. But all the charm in the world couldn't cover this one. The day of the Ellison launch came like a tidal wave. We'd worked 9 months for this. Contracts had been signed. Vendors lined up. Press releases drafted. Everything was riding on the final phase, delivery, validation, and the official transition into post-launch support. The documents had to be flawless. They weren't. The error was small, almost laughably so. A single metric left unconverted in the final performance summary. One row buried deep in the data appendices had been copied from a preliminary test case, not the validated live environment. It made the entire report read like the system was underperforming by 27%, which, of course, it wasn't. But Ellison didn't know that, because they saw the report before anyone caught the mistake. $70 million. That was the value of the full-phase continuation contract with Ellison, and it vanished in an hour. They pulled the deal, not because of the error alone, but because it was the final straw. There had been too many delays, too many inconsistencies, too much amateurism. They lost confidence, and that's all it ever takes. Mr. Callahan lost everything he'd been building on the assumption that Tessa could lead, and it all came crumbling down at 10:34 a.m., when he read the email from Ellison's VP. "We appreciate the effort, but due to unresolved inconsistencies in your performance documentation, we've elected to pause further engagement, effective immediately." I was at my desk when he read it. I saw his hand grip the edge of his desk like he was bracing for impact. Then came the yelling. Not at her, of course. He never yelled at her. He yelled into the phone, at legal, at marketing, at his assistant, at fate. But we all knew the truth. Tessa submitted the final report. Tessa signed off. Tessa insisted she had double-checked everything. And this time, I hadn't stepped in, because it wasn't my job anymore. She sat outside his office, pale, trembling, staring down at her phone like it might rewrite reality if she waited long enough. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. And Mr. Callahan? He looked like a man who had bet everything on a card he didn't understand and just watched the dealer take it all away. He didn't speak to me that day, but he would. I knew it was coming, because when the house burns down, the arsonist always comes crawling back to the one person who knew how to keep the walls from catching fire in the first place. The silence after the fallout was heavier than the shouting ever had been. Mr. Callahan didn't look at me for 2 days. He floated through the office with that broken, stunned expression of someone who'd finally realized the throne he sat on was made of paper. The Ellison contract was gone. So was our credibility. Clients were already whispering. And Tessa? She'd vanished. No goodbye. No apology. Just a quiet disappearance like a smudge wiped from glass. But even now, even after all that damage, Mr. Callahan didn't come to me. Not really. He held an emergency department meeting where he danced around accountability like it was someone else's job. "We've had a setback," he said, eyes glassy, voice hollow. "But we'll recover. We always do." No mention of the $70 million mistake. No acknowledgement of the woman he handed my job to. No apology for what he took from me. Just spin. It was that moment, watching him stand there, still refusing to understand, that I knew. I was done. Not broken, not bitter, just done. I went back to my desk, opened a blank document, and started writing. "Dear Mr. Callahan, this letter is to formally notify you of my resignation, effective 2 weeks from today. I want to thank you for the opportunities I've had during my time at Westbridge. I'm proud of the work I've led, the team I've built, and the clients I've served. I've given this department everything, my time, my energy, my loyalty. But loyalty without respect becomes something else entirely. It becomes silence, self-erasure. And I'm not willing to give that anymore. Please consider this my formal exit from the version of Westbridge that chose performance theater over accountability, politics over leadership, and proximity over experience. I will transition my remaining tasks professionally, but I will not stay in a place that confuses survival with success. Sincerely, Rose A. Grant. I printed it, folded it neatly, walked into his office, where he was mid-call, and placed it gently on his desk. He looked up, confused, and I met his eyes for the first time in days. Not angry, not afraid, just clear. "Rose," he started, reaching for the letter. "What's this about?" And I smiled. "You'll figure it out." Then I turned and walked out. Not defeated. 3 days after I handed in my resignation, he finally came to me. I was at my desk, organizing what little remained. Client notes, archived templates, a thank you card from my team from 2 years ago. Things that had once made me feel seen. Now they just felt like relics from a place I no longer belonged to. Mr. Callahan hovered near the edge of my desk like a ghost. "Rose," he said, his voice softer than I'd ever heard it. "Can we talk?" I didn't respond right away, just looked up, calm, steady. He stepped closer, holding a manila folder. "I know things. Spiraled. I've had some time to reflect. I made mistakes. Big ones." I raised an eyebrow. Losing Ellison made me realize. He trailed off, then inhaled sharply. "I need you. The department needs you. No one else knows how to hold this place together like you do. You were the spine, Rose. And I should have seen that sooner." He placed the folder on my desk. Inside was a formal offer, my old title back, plus a pay increase, an apology wrapped in compensation. But I wasn't moved. I looked him straight in the eyes. "I'm not interested in a quiet return." He blinked. "What do you mean?" "I mean," I said, my voice even, "if you want me back, there are conditions. 2 to be exact." He nodded slowly, guarded. "Name them." 1, I said. Tessa is fired. Immediately. No reassignment, no transfer, no glowing goodbye email. He looked like he'd swallowed glass. That's drastic. I raised a hand. Not negotiable. He nodded stiffly. And the second? A public apology. From you. At the next leadership meeting. I want you to acknowledge what happened. That I was demoted unfairly. That my work was erased. That a department built on integrity was nearly dismantled for the sake of appearances. He went pale. You want me to admit that? He asked, stunned. In front of the execs? Yes, I said. Public disrespect requires public repair. Otherwise, it's not real. He didn't respond. Just stood there, breathing unevenly. I let the silence stretch. He wasn't used to people making demands, especially not people like me, quiet, methodical, reliable. But that was his mistake. He thought my silence was weakness. It never was. Finally, he spoke, voice hoarse. Let me think about it. I leaned back, arms crossed. You do that. But don't take too long. Because after next week, I won't be here to fix what's left. He left without another word. But the fallout came fast. Rumors spread within hours. That Rose had cornered the boss. That he looked wrecked after the conversation. That she'd made a demand that would change everything. And just like that, the story grew. Because people weren't whispering about Tessa anymore. They were whispering about me. The woman who stood up. Who walked away. Who said, enough. And for once, they weren't whispering in pity. They were whispering in awe. It happened faster than I expected. 2 days after our last conversation, Mr. Callahan called an emergency leadership meeting. Mandatory attendance, no agenda. Just a cold block of time on everyone's calendar with one word in the subject line, accountability. I didn't go. Not yet. I waited in the break room with a cup of coffee, watching the door from down the hall. And then it happened. He stood before the department, pale but composed, and he said the words I thought I'd never hear come out of his mouth. I owe this team an apology. I made decisions that undermined the people who built our success. I ignored experience. I favored image over results. And in doing so, I put a $70 million contract, and this department's integrity, at risk. A silence fell over the room so thick you could hear people breathing. I demoted Rose Grant unjustly, he said, and I promoted someone unqualified to a position that demanded trust, not favoritism. That was my failure. One I intend to correct. The room was still quiet, but people were leaning in now, listening. I've accepted Tessa's resignation, he added quickly, the words clipped but final. Effective immediately. Then his voice cracked just slightly. And I've asked Rose to return, not as a favor, but because she's the only one who can bring this department back to what it was. She is, without question, the reason we've come this far. He paused. And thanks to her decision to hold this company accountable, Ellison has reopened discussions. They're willing to re-engage the full contract, pending her leadership on the final phase. That's when I walked in. Every head turned. I didn't gloat. I didn't smile. I just took the seat at the head of the table, the one that used to be mine, and now, officially, was again. Mr. Callahan looked at me, voice soft. Welcome back, Rose. And for the first time in a very, very long while, it felt like respect.